listen.
Never in my life associated the word boring with baseball.
We know what's up.
Me? Yeah. Famous? Yeah.
And I'm like giddy over there smiling like, we're about to win this shit.
Did everyone give you crap? Give me a good host story.
I'm not picking it up.
We both love the game.
We talk about it every day.
Getting on baseball.
Having some popcorn, you're fooling around your phone.
I'd have to wait in line for 3 hours.
Hang on, because it's about to be a wild ride.
All right, there's no human being I'd rather be talking to right now than Will Sammon. Fact. Will, how you doing? There you go. We need more smiles in this time of chaos, Will, right?
Rob, I think that's I know you say that about pretty much anybody that hops on with you, but I'm not sure if I believe you, but I'll definitely take it.
Oh, I don't. I here's the thing. I've said this a few times. Yeah, I say it, but I mean it because I love everybody who comes on. Like I love talking to, and I was looking forward to our conversation. And for a lot of reasons, but it's true. It's absolutely true. And it also gets me psyched up. It's like, throwing the cougar in the car. Let's go. But Will, before we get going, because we're going to talk a lot about Mets and all that's going on with them. And also we'll get a little bit into the interview we did, Mets related interview with Jared Porter. But just take us through sort of your path. I'm always interested in paths. I love the great profession of journalism and how it's changed and how you've landed where you've landed, which is with The Athletic, obviously. But take me through how sort of you got to where you've landed.
Yeah, I kind of see myself actually as like one of like the last people to kind of go down the traditional journalism path where you start off covering, high school sports, probably on like a part-time level and like stringing and doing that kind of thing. I did that for a long, long time, actually. Like essentially started my career at Newsday in New York, covering high school sports. And I did that while I was in college. I went to Queens College, which is not a powerhouse journalism institution. It is a commuter school in the city here. So not a whole lot of fanfare attached to that, but that forced me to like really work at it and to really work hard to sort of get recognition and to receive any sort of opportunities. And so I put my name out there in the traditional way of like applying to every single thing. And I, of course, did not get a whole lot of yeses back. Frankly, got a lot of no's, most of them no's. But, just kept plugging away. And by the time I kind of started with Newsday, I had already done like weekly newspaper internships covering news and politics and just local variety of the day stuff. So I did that for a while. And yeah, once I started out with Newsday, which by the way, they initially had me as just like a web person, like web producer type intern, helping out in like the spring, unpaid, that kind of thing. And I essentially just begged them to like give me more writing opportunities. And finally, something cracked open in their high school desk. Like they're one of the last newspapers that fully staffs high schools, and they cover it really well. And this was about 10 years ago, and they're still cranking it out that way. So a lot of respect for them for doing that, and it's really cool. And people over there really appreciate it. High school football and high school baseball and lacrosse, big deals over there. So kudos to them. But yeah, I did that for a couple of years, and we had a great staff, actually. I mean, we had Laura Albanese still with the day. She was part of our staff. So I really liked the idea of being from there, but it forced me to like learn the traditional way and to, cover high schools, keep your own stats, make sure you're doing the work, you're doing the reporting, because it's not like anybody else is going to be doing it. Nobody else is calling the Cold Spring.
No. When you're covering the high school football games, they're not running up with stat packs, So yeah.
No, yeah, but like also like nobody else is going to know when the guy's going to get fired or anything like that unless you happen to know. Like nobody's posting that on Twitter or anything like that. So you got to do the reporting, you got to do the work. And so from there, because that was only part-time, I was hoping to get a full-time job eventually, of course, and put my name out there for a lot of different spots. Ended up in Alabama covering high school football full-time. And for somebody like me who grew up in New York City, it was definitely.
What was that like? Just real quick, what was that? I remember this is going way back a little bit. There was the I wasn't documentary. It was a show. I think it was like on MTV on Hoover,
Hmm.
the Hoover. It was on high
Yeah,
school
Hoover
football in
High.
Alabama.
Yeah.
Yeah, and but it's we focus so much on tech. What was it like covering that? Because that is one thing to cover high schools in New York. It's another thing to cover high school football in Alabama, right?
Yeah, when I first got there, somebody had asked me if I had ever covered anything as important as like the local high school football game. And like they were dead serious. And like you got to remember this was like in the middle of the summer of like 2015-ish. And like I said, I had done work with Newsday, and during the summer, like Newsday, to their credit, would allow me to cover the Yankees. They would have me cover the Mets. And so I was just off of covering like Red Sox Yankees as like, yeah, the fourth or fifth person there for the newspaper, but I was still there.
Oh
And
yeah,
like as this guy's asking me if like this is the most important thing ever, because for them it is. Like
yeah,
for him you bet that it is. And they don't really care about the Yankees Red Sox rivalry. Like that has nothing on
yeah.
like the high versus Auburn high. Like that's just not on the same level apparently. So look, it forced me to really to kind of veer clear of cliches, but it really forced me to better understand people of all cultures and not be so narrowly focused on what I believe in and what I think is right. So I still may think what I think is right, but I am more open to trying to at least understand where other people are coming from on certain topics than I may have otherwise would have been had I not worked there and lived there and spent, a couple of years of my life there. So I was over there, then jumped to Mississippi, which wasn't much of a difference in culture, and covered Mississippi State football for a while. And by the time the Athletic really got going and built momentum was around 2018, and they had me cover college football for them first. And I covered the University of Florida. And I did that for a couple of years. And I had always wanted to cover baseball, so I was really annoying about it with them and just told them every single opportunity that I saw, like, hey, this is what I want to do. Like, the Rays job is open, this job is open. Like, please, like, just talk to me about this. And so eventually the Brewers job became open, and that's the one that they allowed me to pursue. And so I did that for, a few seasons before jumping over to join Tim Britton and covering the Mets for the Athletic, which I've been doing now since 22. So it's definitely been a long sort of path to get to this point, but definitely one that I'm appreciative of.
Dude, you're scratching right where I itch, man. Like, and this is, and I didn't even know your whole story, but yeah, I going way back, much more before you. It's sort of that this is how it was done. This is how I did it. I think I had my first full-time job when I was 29. It was like we were talking about this on a group chat the other day about covering Thanksgiving Day games in Massachusetts. You do this, where I think it was 17 straight years of that's covering Thanksgiving Day games. But my point is that, and I could, well, as you're saying this, I can see how this molded you into being the writer and reporter that you are now. And what I know of you, what I've seen, it's like all of that have used all your experiences to do the job that you do. And again, like I don't know you super well, but I do see like how you're head down, get the job done, no this go, whatever it is. And obviously you and Tim Britton do a great job, great team together with the Athletic. But I do, Will, like, not to sound like old man yelling at clouds, but I do think that element of, all right, it took me a while to get here. When I walk in that clubhouse, it is business, man. Like it is, let's get the job done. And I think that emanates from a path like yours, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that a lot of times that's what we're missing. I mean, honestly, we're missing a lot of that. It's hey, this go in, this hang out, whatever, this is cool. But it took you a long time, took me a long time. But when you get in there, it's let's go, right? Am I wrong?
No, you're absolutely right. And I think that's part of like what helps me as a reporter because I don't really like I'm not going to wait for somebody else to report something. And so like I think there's a some one of my biggest gripes about the industry sometimes is that there's a segment of reporters these days that because of like social media and because how we consume news, they've just resigned themselves, I feel like in some ways, to like not aggressively pursue some certain parts of the job, whether it's transactions or coaching news, whatever it is, right? Like they've just almost resigned themselves to be like, that's somebody else's job, and like when that happens, it happens, and I'll confirm it or
Yeah,
whatever.
I'll
You know,
confirm it, or I'll aggregate it, and I'll put eyeball emojis or whatever it is. Yeah, exactly.
yeah, there's a segment of people like that, and I think that sucks. I think that it's it's not great because you got to do the reporting on your own. And I think like what you find is that like the people who have like those insidery jobs or who are doing those types of reporting, it's because they started asking those questions anyway, like when they were like when Ken Rosenthal in the 80s and 90s, there was no other way to do this. Like you were not finding it out within 5 minutes. And like nowadays it's like you find out on social media, and if you weren't on it or if you were missing something, you could figure it out in 5 minutes and you're fine. But it wasn't the case back then. And I just feel like that different generation that we live in now, it's not for the best in that respect because I kind of have some concerns on like how many reporters there are that are actually going for it these days in that way. I'm not sure if there's that many. So that's one thing. And I think that like, I'm super appreciative of the fact that like I'm the type of person that wants to go after those things, that wants to run toward where there is news, because I feel like that's the job. Like it's the job to do that. And so I take a lot of pride in that. And I'm glad that you brought that up.
Yeah, and not to paint with a broad brush, but let's be honest, a lot of people want to be paid in likes rather than like actually get the good stories. I mean, that's just a reality of it. And it's an addictive thing. And I think in the industry right now, but what also is addictive, and I think that it's harder to report a story, it's harder to write a story, it's harder to, like to your point, chase a story. But I would say that of all these people who are getting the sugar high of likes, well, the feeling of getting a good story, as you well know, is much better. So again, I'm preaching, but you again, you hit the sweet spot for my mindset and I love talking about the industry. But I along those lines, when you get to New York, how is reporting, doing the job different than maybe you even thought it would be? And how has it even changed in the few years that you've been there?
I feel like I've definitely had to raise my own game from once I got here because in Milwaukee there are only three or four dedicated beat writers, not including myself at the time. So the group was like five. And
Yeah.
traveling, like that counts two people from the same newspaper plus MLB.com and then myself, and then maybe the Associated Press, maybe not. But as far as traveling people go, it would probably just be three for like a road trip on the high end. And most of the time, probably just two. So you go from that to New York, where the traveling group of writers is, I think, six or seven at times, give or take, depending on the importance of the series or whatever it is. So you find that if you're thinking of an idea in New York, or if you're going down a certain path with like a player story, or if you're curious about something, my rule is that there's probably at least one other person who is digging into the exact same thing
Right.
on the exact same day. So you better move on it and you better act on it and not put it off or wait to the perfect time. Like there is no perfect time.
It is
Like,
so, not to interrupt you, but it's so true because when you walk into a clubhouse, say you have a story idea in the market your size, you're immediately thinking, okay, who's creeping toward the player that I want to talk to? If they are, how can I take the angle where I talk to them first? Which is a legit thing. I mean, it's knowing the angles of a room. Where is a player going to exit? Where all of that stuff, and and to your point, it's just who immediately when you have a story idea before you even get in the clubhouse, who might have that? And if they do get that, if they do get a story, a big part of it too is A, how can I advance it? And B, where did they get it from? Which is another big part of it. So I don't mean to interrupt, but again, it's preaching
yeah,
my language. So
yeah, spoken like a man who has spent a lot of time in the Boston media
uh
market. So yeah,
the angles in the
definitely how
clubhouse
it is.
the angles in the clubhouse is, and this is one of the things that I think comes with, you talk experience and when you're dropped in, it's not just sitting there and waiting. It is all right. How much did that guy want to talk? Where is he going to leave the room? If he doesn't want to talk, is he going to go out that door? Because a lot of times, oh, I got to get treatment. Oh, all right, sure. Or is he just going to go the right? All of it. I mean, all of it. But you're really, really good at it. So I just want to keep going down that road. So yeah. So just keep espousing on what you were saying about how maybe it was different from what you thought, but also how it's changed over the last few years.
Yeah, I also think the other thing that like I've tried to actually get better at is, and this sounds a little bit silly though, is like the idea that to kind of like forgive myself for losing a lot of the times
That's
because like
hard. It's hard to
you're gonna
do.
get beat.
Yeah.
Yeah, like and then like when I first started on the Mets and like when I first started to at least feel better about my quality of work while covering this team, I just hate it. I mean, I still don't like it. Like if somebody has something like an hour or two before me that I was actively working on, it sucks. It's a bad feeling, but like I don't try to have my whole day ruined by that as much as maybe I
Mm.
did in the past. It's definitely a work in progress, but I felt like that as an aside is important because of the size of the media market, like it's going to happen a lot. Like it's going to happen. Sometimes it happens day after day over periods of time, whether it's like the trade deadline or the winter. That's just the way it goes sometimes. I mean, like we're talking to people, everybody's doing similar reporting at this time of year. So like there's only a handful of paths to go down on a given day, and you're just going to get beat sometimes. And I feel like that's okay because like as long as you're doing an honest day of work while doing your reporting, I'm actually like okay with that because I could say to myself like I did everything I could do. Like I can't help it if somebody else spoke to this person, happened to speak to this person an hour before me, and therefore is an hour ahead of me. I mean, I can't help it if like I had X, Y, and Z to do in my personal life. Like it just is what it is. So I feel like it's one of those things that I've had to like grow to accept a little bit more while also, maintaining some level of competitiveness too. Like you don't want to just like be like, oh, okay, yeah, another loss.
No,
Like
but I
that's it.
totally hear
But
what you're talking about. And it's hard. It's like the idea of like during trade deadline of having to prop up your phone on the shower, so you don't miss something. And then if you do miss something, but here's the thing, I think that Will, in the last few years or recently, the best way to approach that thing, which we all go through, is understanding the news turns over so fast, man. It turns over so fast, and the next idea is right around the corner. So, I mean, but again, you all the things. This is why you're so good. Like you are preaching my language. So, thank you for that.
yeah, and the other part too is that like I do have a great partner, I think, in Tim Britton, like you mentioned. And I think the best thing about that is that we allow one another to play to that person's strengths a lot. And so that helps me a great deal. And I think that it would be, a disservice for me not to mention that in my own particular situation with covering the Mets is that unlike other people, like I do have somebody else like who is next to me who's doing a lot of quality work and who's doing things differently than I am as
Mm.
well in some ways, and who has frankly, a lot more experience than me too in covering a major league team. So, I'm grateful for that as well, and that definitely made the transition so much more easier than it otherwise would have been going from Milwaukee to the Mets.
It is so awesome, again, like being able to work off somebody and also get along with them. And as I said at the outset, I think you guys are the tops, man. Like you guys just do such a great job. I want to come back to, the obvious sort of going from Milwaukee to New York, the David Stern thing is, and how that, how your relationship was then, how it is now. Is there any change? Because a lot of times, and I'm not saying this is the case, but sometimes what happens is that you might know someone really, really well, and then they get in a different environment, and it just becomes they may become more protective or whatever it is. How is that relationship, or how has he done things compared to one market to the other?
Well, one of the biggest things that I respect about David Stearns is I think that he is a guy he doesn't give BS. And I think when he says something, he typically means it at that point in time, whether or not it turns out to be the case, who knows? But when he speaks, there's a lot of intent behind his words. and I appreciate that. And I feel like he treats a lot of people the same, regardless. So, like he gives people fair shots, and he doesn't do the favoritism game. I feel like, at least, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he is, and I'm just oblivious to it. But I doubt it. He's just somebody who he's going to go about his job in a very professional way, and so like it didn't necessarily, I don't think it really helped me in the sense of like, oh man, he's the executive of the team and I'm gonna, have an advantage over everybody because I had covered him in the past. Like that's just not reality.
Mhm.
Where it has actually helped in some way is just the experience of covering him in the past and like just knowing from his previous moves and his previous decisions, just maybe how his brain tends to work in terms of like how he sees a major league roster and what is important to him. Like I knew from covering him in the past that this is a guy who has had a track record of seeing pitchers develop and not necessarily having to pay for that for it to happen and to be a success. The equation is different here, where he has a much larger budget, but he's still going to carry some similar principles. Like he's going to care about defense. He's going to feel like depth is like the most important thing ever, and he's going to build his team in a similar way than he built it with Milwaukee, perhaps with more talent because he has more money to spend on the talent. But again, the principles are pretty much the same. And so I think that's really like the only area where I had an advantage is like I had covered an organization that he ran for a few years. So like I knew what was important to him and I knew what he valued most. And I knew what he didn't really put a whole lot of value on. And that helped me in terms of just how I could be more efficient with my time in what I tried to dig into and what I said to myself, that's not really worth it. So that was really like the biggest benefit, I feel like, is just knowing where to look just based on his experience, based on my experience covering him, and not necessarily like the relationship between myself and him.
So when the obvious example of that, maybe I'm wrong, but you look at how they get the pitchers, the Severino, the Manaya, and now the Montas. I mean, everyone's probably around the Mets like, hey, what happened? Yesterday we were getting Verlander and Scherzer. Now we're doing this, and it obviously worked out. And so when you almost have to give him the benefit of the doubt a little bit when it comes to Montas right now, right? Because to your point, this is how he's done thing. Am I wrong?
Yeah, I think that's right. I don't at the time of the Severino and the Minaya deals, I really, really like those. And part of that was because I kind of knew some things about them, just because I just happened to know people who were part of the organizations that they played for in those instances. Whereas with Montas, I'm not as familiar. So like I'm not as like, yeah, sure, this is a great move type of thing. So we'll see. It's gonna definitely test
Yeah.
like and like nobody really knows. Like they don't really know. They're making the best decision they can based on his price point in the market, and it makes sense for their roster, so they're going to try it. And they do, I think, like you mentioned, deserve the benefit of the doubt, in that he should be at least serviceable for like what they're trying to do, based on like what they've been able to do in the past with similar type profiles. And there's reasons to like him. So yeah, I think that that's part of it for sure.
Well, so now we're going to morph into the big ticket item, which is obviously the Juan Soto conversation. And when you talk about how David Stearns does stuff, well, this is an outlier, right? This is something that when it comes to how David Stearns does stuff, there's nothing like this. I mean, there's no example from Milwaukee like this. And so you're thinking, okay, clearly valuing the player, but also then there's the recruiting of the player. And another subtle thing that maybe we can go back to sort of the journalism talk, which is how much does David Stearns not leaks things? This is we're going through this now. And my take, I think you never count out the Yankees because I think they do a good job of zigging and zagging and making it's the Aaron Judge thing, right? It's like, hey, no, 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 no. We're out. We're out. And then boom, there it is. They've done that for years. Cashman has done that for years. When it comes to the Mets, this is, I think, maybe one of the pieces that you can take away from your experience, like how protective he is of information. So along all those lines, like what's your perception of this?
Yeah, I think Steve Cohen is a huge element of course here. Like it's they're only in this situation because of Steve Cohen and him lurking in the shadows as like the billionaire owner, of course, and perhaps the most money in baseball. And so that's the big element, obviously. But as far as David Stearns is concerned, like yes, he hasn't recruited these types of players, didn't have that experience, but I think it's pretty similar in the sense that like I said before, he's not somebody who's going to BS his way through anything. So he's going to bring that same genuine spiel that he gave to like Josh Lindblom from when he
Oh
saw
my
him in
God.
Korea,
Yes.
like he's going to
Yeah.
apply the same stuff. It's like uh, he's a Harvard graduate who speaks in elegant sentences and who makes his point thoroughly clear with intent, like I said. So I think he's a very good presenter and he knows how to sell his own vision of what a franchise should look like. And he's got a track record that speaks to that anyway of success, where, he turned the Brewers into a perennial playoff team every single year. And first season with the Mets went all the way to the NLCS. And so I think he has that working for him in his favor when he approaches these things. And he has that really good feel, I think, for like knowing also um, what probably is most important to a player, what they kind of value the most, and what he wants them to know about him, like what he sort of sees as important. I think there's a lot that the player does too. Like the player probably wants to be part of a winning team. Like, how do you get there? Well, David Stearns can definitely explain that. And he's not somebody who's going to be overwhelmed by that at all. Like, he's a very confident guy. So, yeah, I don't put that as like that big of a minus for him as far as not having the experience in those types of situations because he's going to be himself anyway. I'm pretty confident in that from covering him. And as far as like the information goes, yeah, he's in public settings, like he's very hard to like get a whole lot of information out of. I don't know like how like I would challenge anybody listening to this to go back to like the GM meetings a few weeks ago
Yeah.
and to listen to David's answers. And you tell me like what I should have been writing those days because I'd love to know, like I'd love to know like what some of those things that he said where those kernels of information were because I missed them. So like he probably is not one that's going to give a whole lot, but that's okay too. Like that's what forces you to kind of do the legwork on the other ends and do some stuff from like either the inside out and present it that way. And I've done that before too. And there's other ways, like there's other ways to cover an organization than just going to the top person, time after time and hoping he sheds some light on something because there's not much incentive a lot of the times for him to do that other than trying to maybe have fans, I don't want to say temper, but just have like good expectations, like to have the right expectations for what this offseason could be for the Mets.
There is also in this case, I think in the Soto case, kind of like Otani last year, where I remember we were talking about this the other day. The Dodgers or Otani saying, if anything leaks out, you're out. You're out. And then we have the Dave Roberts getting on the phone immediately after he said something. And so in this level thing, it's not only the guy, but it's the guy telling everybody, like the inside out guys, right? Everybody, hey, I get it. Sometimes we talk, nobody's talking in this case because it's that important. I don't know if he's ever had to do that, but I know in situations like this, and this, I got a feeling the organizations involved are probably passing along that message more and more because they're seeing their competitors doing it. I mean, that's my take. What's your take on it?
Yeah, I think somewhat similar. And it kind of stinks because it's like it's baseball at the end of the day. Like, does it really matter that we're talking
Yeah.
about who you're going to get to play first base next year? Like, is it that big of a secret? Like, is it that like we all know it's going to be one of these three guys? So like, what's the big deal here? So that's part of it. But like, I also don't want to minimize like that's their livelihoods too. So like, I don't want to minimize that and be like, oh, it doesn't matter. It does matter to them. Like that's their job is to win that negotiation or to get the right player. And so it just doesn't behoove them to have a lot of information out that may hurt their chances.
Mm.
Um, and sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. And I think with like Soto in particular, like we're talking about somebody who's going to command like $600 million. So that's quite the investment. And so like I don't blame them for this being part of the process with that, because it is something that matters more than like what I was saying before of like who's going to play first base. Like this is a 600 million plus dollar investment here
Yeah, with
that you're
all due
making
respect to
X amount a
Josh
year.
Lindblom. Yes, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, like I can kind of understand like the idea of like, yeah, we're not going to say a whole lot about this one, and that's fine too. Like, I think we're only maybe a week or so, hopefully something like that, away
Oh,
from this
please,
ending.
please,
Yeah,
please.
so we'll see. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think
All
that's the
right.
way.
So with all that said, give me we love the vibe meter. We love the vibe. We like what's your it's it's been all over the place for a lot of people, but you have a pretty good sense of things. Not to say that this absolutely is going to happen, but you get a vibe about Juan Soto, where he's going to land, where the Mets are in regards to these other teams.
I have no problem saying that I have really no idea
Mhm. Oh,
with
good for
this.
you. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
I
like I
think
have like
nobody,
zero.
honestly, that's 99.9% of the people in public who's not directly involved in it.
Right. Right. Like there are so many other players where I'd be like, yeah, either like, yeah, I feel great about that, or like, no, I don't like their chances. I really have no idea. I think that there's a lot of good reasons for him to go to the Red Sox. I think um, there's an uphill battle in some way because of the familiarity with the Yankees, right? Like I think that was a little bit, at least my opinion is that that was discredited too early. In this, like the guy just spent a whole year with them and played really, really well, and they got to the World Series,
Mm.
and he knows them, and he, by all accounts, seemed to like them. So I think that that's if the money is similar, I find it hard to believe that he just not stay with the Yankees in some ways if the money is similar, or if the money is the same from all the teams, and that's where they could probably separate themselves. And I'm not saying anything that people already don't know, but yeah, that's probably where like the Mets and the Red Sox may come into play, and frankly the Blue Jays, who may be able to top everybody as far as financial goes. Maybe that won't matter, but they have the ability to do so at least.
It is still bizarre as I said with the Blue Jays, they're the one team other than the Dodgers have shown they will pay a player $700 million, and they got that player Otani to actually make a trip to Dunedin, Florida, which is the ultimate recruiting tool, right? So lastly, I appreciated you surfacing our interview with Jared Porter, and I'm really anxious to sort of get your perspective because you're in the middle of the Mets world. I'm not. I've known Jared, from back when he was with the Red Sox, and to be perfectly honest with you, I was not expecting to be in contact with him again, anytime soon. But I just want to get your perspective, and I want you to be honest about it. I mean, I think that it was a difficult conversation. I think I said to you, I set the world record for ums, which I edited out at the beginning of the podcast because I was it's easing into it was weird. It was a difficult situation, and I wanted to make it clear out of the gate that when it comes to Jared Porter's situation, that a big focus of the conversation has to be on how women in the industry are being treated. There's no question about it. But all of that said, I'm anxious to kind of get your take on it.
Yeah, so I think first, I'm glad that he is at the point in his life where he feels like he can talk about this and can share his perspective on where his life is at and what he's trying to do to correct some behaviors. I think that that's good for him. When I was listening to it, and I thought you did a really good job of facilitating that conversation with him, what always came to my mind was like, it's great that he's like allowed himself to maybe go down the path of understanding himself and like his own behaviors at that time and trying to correct them and maybe to some degree even forgive himself for those things that he did. Ultimately, it's going to come down to whether or not the person he was sending those messages to forgives him and like what that person's life how that person's life got disrupted because of this situation. Like that's ultimately what I don't want to say what should, like, everybody matters, right? But like that's really, I feel like what's at stake there is like this person did something unwanted to this other person. And it's great that that first person saw that and can recognize that behavior was wrong. But at the same time, like we have to keep in mind the other person here was the victim of the situation, and it matters and it will always continue to matter, like how that person views it. Does that person forgive him, or and like where that person is at right now with life as a result of this unfortunate situation. So I tried to keep that in mind as I was listening,
Mm.
and also acknowledge the fact that he seems to have done some considerable work as well, and like he has a wife who her life was disrupted by this, no doubt, and so it was interesting to hear him bring her up as well in some context. So yeah, that to me, it just reminded me of how many different people have become affected by that.
Mm.
And like I said before, I'm glad that he's at the point where he can recognize like that was wrong. And in some ways, it's good for him to speak out because unfortunately, he's not the only person who's doing that, right? So uh, it's wrong to do that. And
Mhm.
therefore, if he's speaking out about it and somebody perhaps is listening, maybe that prevents them from acting in a similar way because there's just no place for it.
And well put by you. And I do think, and you're right. I mean, I think, as I said, and it was really, very rarely, almost never, I do a podcast where, I want to make sure that I articulate what I want to do leading into the podcast. And at the time when I was talking to Jared, I thought, all the things that you said about him, right? And then to your point, a big piece of the puzzle was the victim, how that conversation and how important that was. And that's sort of like why I wrote it out and wanted to intro it that way. But my biggest thing is all the things that you said. This is what I hope is that it does surface some really, really difficult conversations. Difficult conversation, about how women a lot of times are treated in the industry, how that young woman was treated, what she went through, but also the mental health stuff. I thought, and that's obviously what Jared was focusing quite a bit on. And I do feel like this is a big deal. So anyway, I appreciate your perspective of it. I thought you're dead on, and again, thanks for listening. So, oh, there you go. I don't want to listen. I don't want to end with that like a heavy tone, but I know that you would listen to it, and I appreciate you surfacing it, and but to go back to it, I want to thank you also for, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart. We started the podcast by saying, there's no one I'd rather talk to on the planet right now than Will. But Will, this is exactly what I'm talking about. You made my day. You made my day about your path, about stuff that you were saying, because sometimes I do get old man yelling at clouds saying, hey, you know what? Don't just walk in the middle of the clubhouse and look for likes. You know, you work hard, you do a good job. You are a testament and an example of what we should be highlighting, and I hope we did that today. So thank you.
Yeah, maybe I'm just an older person in a
Nah, you're
mid
not old.
30s
You just do it.
body or something like that. But I
Yeah, you're doing it
appreciate
right.
the
I mean, like, you're doing it
conversation,
right.
man.
It's like it doesn't matter what age, you're doing it right. So, but thanks, man. I appreciate you jumping on.
Appreciate it, Rob. Thanks.